Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, and for Mike Papantonio this week. Income inequality has been ranked as one of the top concerns facing the world in 2014. Wealthy elites all over the globe are worried about how dangerous the problem could become, yet they continue to do nothing about it. Joining me now to talk about this is attorney Howard Nations. Howard, this growing problem of income inequality has gotten so bad that elites from all over the world are saying, something's got to be done. We might not be doing anything about it, but we need to address this problem. What's happening?
Well, the fact is that, Farron, that if you just look at the problem in America, there really are two Americas, and there are two economies in this country. The New York Times just reported that 50% of the children in New York City live below the poverty level. And listen to this, 20% of the children in America live below the poverty level. The only civilized country in the world that is worse than that is Romania. That's just totally outrageous.
That is.
The response of the government is Republicans just cut $40 billion from food stamps. There are 1.3 million people facing unemployment being cut off in January, and the Republicans are fighting increases in minimum wage. It's totally outrageous.
It is, and back to this problem of the elites, they understand what they're doing. They're the ones who put these Republicans in office who want to just slash and burn anything that could possibly help out the underprivileged in America. So what's the problem with the elites? What are they saying behind closed doors?
Well, at the World Economic Forum, they surveyed 1,592 leaders from academia, from business, from government, from nonprofits. The elites recognize that this is the second biggest world problem, the widening income disparities. And it's not just that the rich are getting richer, it's that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And the middle class income is diminishing. And in the Middle East and North America, it's a very huge problems. In America, it's a problem.
Right. Well, we saw, with the Arab Spring, a lot of that had to do with the income inequality.
The Pew survey just showed that the gap between the rich and the poor is the major flaw in our economic system. And this comes about as a result of a couple of things worldwide. Number one, the elites, especially in Europe, have followed austerity policies. And number two, especially in America, they've allowed financial predatory practices from the elite. And the government does, again, nothing about that. The public reaction is so extreme to this that even the Pope is talking about it. You're seeing worldwide demonstrations. As you say, we've had the resurgence of fascism in Europe. The spring in Egypt. Even Larry Summers, who was one of the primary people that brought this about in America, is lamenting it now. It's totally ridiculous.
Well, just, 2 weeks ago now, we saw 130 cities across the country saw fast food workers go on strike for the day because they're protesting minimum wage laws, which do tend to vary by state, but overall that wage has remained stagnant for years and years and years. And I think those protests, those strikes, are a good indication of what's to come. We've seen that in Washington, D.C., where they got out in the streets and they protested, a Walmart moving into the city because they're paying poverty wages. And I do think that we're starting to see this. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And of course, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, those companies that they're having to protest against right now are supplementing the income of their workers by sending them to get food stamps. At the same time, they're cutting food stamp supplements by $40 billion. It's just an obscene problem. And on a global level, the global elites are concerned about this not because of any great charitable spirit. They're concerned about it because there's a soft demand. The poor people are getting so little money, and the middle class is getting so little income that they're too poor to buy, and it's hurting the business and the economy of the people who are selling. That's their reason for concern. And there's another reason for concern in Europe and Africa, and that's the prospects of social unrest, because people who have nothing to lose take to the streets. The wealthy have to hide behind walls.
Chris Hedges a couple years ago, he predicted all this in a book that he wrote, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And one of the things he mentions is that the UN does have a specific formula. They know that when income inequality reaches X amount, when social anger reaches Y amount, it creates this form where even some of the most civilized countries, for example, the United States, we could end up seeing something here that resembled what we saw in Egypt or the Middle East or in Europe. And our leaders here might not be concerned about that right now, but do you think that if things keep going this way, that's something we could see?
Yes, I do. I go to Mexico a lot, and I see it could happen in Mexico any day. They literally, the extremely wealthy in Mexico are living behind very high walls with private armies inside, with private security inside the walls of their homes right now. We're not that far away from it here. Retail workers in this country are barely surviving. There's the employers are having food drives, and they're advising their employees to go get food stamps. The minimum wage, there's great, overwhelming public support for it in this country, but the elites won't agree to it. The Republicans are fighting it. Social Security, they're talking about cutting. It's favored by the elite. The public sees a retirement crisis emerging in this country, and they talk today about cutting retirement benefits of the military and the elderly in order to make up part of the deficit that's coming up in mid-January. It's outrageous.
Well, one of the biggest problems is, as you just point out with the Social Security cuts, we've found out recently that a large part of that whole drive, the effort to get the minimum wage cut, is coming from this group called the Business Roundtable, which is essentially a more kind of shadowy version of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, completely funded by business leaders, by bankers who want these Social Security benefits cut. For what reason, I don't know, but they're masquerading as if cutting Social Security is going to solve our budget problems. But Social Security is not even linked to the budget. That is a separate fund. But they've convinced the public that if we do this, we can balance our budget. I mean, help explain that just a little bit.
Well, you also had the Washington Post just came out with this specious deficit argument, saying that we have to cut Social Security because of the deficit crisis. The fact of the matter is the deficit is falling considerably since President Obama took office. Elizabeth Warren came out and very appropriately blasted the Post on that, because this whole idea of the specious arguments that the Social Security needs to be cut or the poor need to be cut in their benefits and just completely decimate the social safety net is ridiculous. And it's going to come back on them.
It is, and I think another part of this problem with the inequality is that for the underclass and the middle class is that the deck is actually stacked against them as far as tax loopholes go. That's something that the elite are taking full advantage of. Explain that for everybody a little bit. How just embedded in the system is this way to benefit the wealthy.
Absolutely. There's the carried interest, which is the big tax loophole that they fight the most about, but that the Republicans strive hardest to preserve. This is what causes hedge fund managers, venture capitalists, and REIT people to pay a 15% tax rate. Even Warren Buffett came out and said it's just ridiculous that I pay a lower tax rate than my secretary. The citizens understand that the rich are underpaying, but the Republicans continue to protect the loophole and their corporate base. But the fact is, Farron, unfortunately, the Democrat establishment polls, Kerry, when he was finance chairman, he voted that you should do away with that, but he lobbied, nah, let's keep it. Obama and Schumer are working quietly behind the scenes to preserve it. So the conclusion that you have to draw is that campaign contributors are more important than voters and taxpayers to both parties.
That is a very sad statement, considering the fact that, you know, anybody who's not in the top 1% or, you know, the leader of a large business group, they don't have the money to go out and hire lobbyists that some of these other folks have. They don't have the means to go out there and fight. All they can do is what we've been seeing. They've been taking to the streets. And I do want to hit, we've only got a couple minutes left, I want to hit back on the minimum wage issue, because we have seen so much fight coming from the American public on that. You know, as we mentioned, we had 130 cities out there fighting, you know, for fast food workers, you know, to work, make a living wage. We're not trying to, you know, create wealth for these people. We're not trying to just take away from elites for this, you know, socialism that you hear the right, you know, beating the drum about all the time. This is about making sure people can provide food for their families. This is about making sure that people can, you know, afford health care. This is not socialism, as the folks at Fox News want us to think that it is. This is just about basically common decency. Do you agree?
Absolutely. The current minimum wage works out to $15,000 a year if you work a 40-hour week, which is below the poverty level. And so these are people that are working 2 jobs now and 3 jobs, literally, to try to survive. And the idea that the minimum wage now has gone back down in terms of real buying power, it is extremely low right now, and it's lower than it was 15 years ago. It's ridiculous that real income for middle-class Americans is also down, and the minimum wage is down. Now, the president is trying to raise that back up to over $10 an hour. It's the likelihood of that happening is it's just not going to happen, because the Republicans are going to block it.
Well, we've got an election coming up now in about 11 months, a little under 11 months. I think this public anger is going to continue. I think that we're going to continue to see a push for a living wage, and I think it's going to play a very important role in the 2014 midterms. But Howard Nations, thank you for joining us today.